She turned down Harvard and Yale. She earned a real PhD in neuroscience. She played a scientist on one of the most watched sitcoms in television history. She hosted one of the most iconic game shows in American broadcasting. And she did most of it while raising two children largely on her own. By any measure, Mayim Bialik's life reads like an overachiever's highlight reel. The kind of biography that gets written up in magazine profiles with words like remarkable and inspiring scattered throughout. But none of that is what people are talking about right now. What has the internet buzzing? What has people stopping mid-scroll and forwarding links to friends and arguing in comment sections is something quieter and stranger and more personal than any of her career milestones. It is a transformation that didn't happen on a red carpet or in a press release. It happened slowly, then all at once, and when people finally noticed it, they couldn't look away. This is the full story. To understand what's happening with Mayim Bialik right now, you have to go back to the beginning. Not the beginning of her fame, but the beginning of who she actually is beneath it. She was born in December 1975 in San Diego, California, to a family that placed enormous weight on education and cultural identity. Her parents were not Hollywood people. They were not chasing celebrity. They raised her with a grounded sense of where she came from. 3 of her 4 grandparents were immigrants, and her Jewish heritage was a living part of her upbringing, not just a label. That foundation would shape everything that came after. She first appeared on television as a young girl, landing minor roles in the late 1980s, including a notable appearance in the 1988 film Beaches, where she played the childhood version of Bette Midler's character with such uncanny accuracy that audiences were stunned to learn she was wearing a wig and colored contacts. That performance alone was enough to establish her as someone with unusual instincts and presence on screen. But it was Blossom that made her a household name. The NBC sitcom ran from 1991 to 1995, and during those years, Mayim Bialik became one of the most recognizable teenage faces on American television. The character, quirky, curious, navigating adolescence in an unconventional household, was not entirely unlike the person playing her. Between takes on set, while other young actors gravitated toward the social aspects of production, Mayim was often found reading. Not celebrity gossip, academic material, the kind of reading that had nothing to do with her lines and everything to do with who she was becoming. When she was 17 years old, acceptance letters arrived from Harvard and Yale. Most families would have framed those letters. Most teenagers in Hollywood would have seen them as a trophy, proof that they were more than just a pretty face on a sitcom. Mayim turned them both down. Not because she didn't value education. She valued it more than almost anything. She turned them down because she wanted to stay in California, close to her family, and because she believed she could pursue both tracks simultaneously, science and acting, intellect and creativity, without having to sacrifice one for the other. She enrolled at UCLA instead, and that single decision revealed something essential about her character. She was never willing to let the world's categories define her options. At UCLA, she did not coast. She earned her bachelor's degree in neuroscience, Jewish studies, and Hebrew, then kept going. In 2007, she completed her PhD in neuroscience. Her doctoral dissertation focused on hypothalamic activity in individuals with Prader-Willi syndrome, a complex genetic condition. This was not an honorary degree. This was not a celebrity's vanity project dressed up in academic language. This was years of laboratory work, peer-reviewed research, and rigorous scientific methodology. She had done the thing fully, without shortcuts. And then, with a doctorate in hand and a legitimate path into academic research ahead of her, she walked back onto a television set. When Mayim Bialik joined the Big Bang Theory in 2010 as Amy Farrah Fowler, a neurobiologist and eventual love interest for Jim Parsons' Sheldon Cooper, the casting had an obvious symmetry to it that audiences found irresistible. Here was a real neuroscientist playing a neuroscientist on television. The show leaned into it. Viewers loved it. She received 4 Emmy nominations for the role, and for a stretch of years in the 2010s, she was one of the most visible women in American comedy. Visibility, though, is a complicated thing for someone who has opinions and isn't afraid to share them. The bigger her platform grew, the more every public statement she made became subject to examination and debate. In 2012, she published a parenting book called Beyond the Sling, which laid out her philosophy around attachment parenting, an approach that includes practices like extended breastfeeding, co-sleeping, and wearing your infant in a carrier throughout the day. The reaction was immediate and sharply divided. Her supporters saw it as a thoughtful, research-informed approach to early childhood development, written by someone who had actually studied the science of human development at a doctoral level. Her critics called it extreme, judgmental toward parents who made different choices, and potentially harmful. The argument spilled across parenting forums, television panels, and opinion columns. Mayim didn't retreat. She continued making her case, in interviews and in her writing, standing behind her views with the same intellectual confidence that had carried her through a decade of graduate research. But the experience introduced a pattern that would repeat itself. Throughout the coming years, her willingness to speak with conviction made her credible to some audiences and made her a target for others. Then, in 2013, her marriage to Michael Stone ended after nearly a decade together. The divorce became public news at the height of her professional visibility, and she navigated it while continuing to film, do press, and raise two sons largely on her own. She was guarded about the details, understandably so, but she didn't pretend it was easy. The exhaustion of that season, carrying a private grief through a very public professional life, was something she let surface occasionally, in careful doses. In 2017, the Harvey Weinstein story broke, and the Me Too movement swept through Hollywood with a speed and force that left almost no one unaffected. Mayim, like many public figures in those weeks, chose to write about her own experience navigating the industry. Her op-ed ran in the New York Times, and by all accounts, her intention was sincere. She wrote about growing up in Hollywood as a girl who did not fit the conventional standard of beauty, about being largely overlooked by the powerful men who preyed on young women in the industry, and about the personal choices she had made over the years, the way she dressed, the spaces she avoided, the image she projected, that she believed had kept her off that particular radar. The response was immediate and devastating. Readers, commentators, and cultural critics across social media and major publications argued that her framing implied something she almost certainly did not intend. That women who dressed differently, who moved through high-profile spaces, who were targeted by powerful men, bore some responsibility for what happened to them. The term victim blaming appeared in hundreds of responses. Her words, whatever she had meant by them, were read as suggesting that appearance and behavior could serve as protection, and by extension, that the women who had been targeted had somehow failed to protect themselves adequately. She apologized. She clarified. She acknowledged publicly that her words had caused real pain to people she had genuinely wanted to support. But apologies in the internet era have a particular half-life, and the damage to her reputation in certain corners of public life proved lasting. Articles from that period continued surfacing whenever her name was mentioned. For years afterward, she carried the weight of being associated with a position she maintained she never intended to take. What made the fallout particularly painful was the specific nature of the wound. She had spent her entire adult life building credibility through education, careful research, and intellectual rigor. She had done everything right by the standards of serious, thoughtful public discourse. And in a single essay, written quickly during one of the most emotionally charged cultural moments in recent memory, that credibility took damage it would not fully recover from. By 2021, when Jeopardy came calling, Mayim was in the middle of what could generously be described as a complicated public rehabilitation. The pandemic had done something unexpected for her. It had given her podcast, Bialik's Breakdown, a real and growing audience. She was opening up about mental health, therapy, the science of emotional resilience, and the specific challenges of being a single parent navigating anxiety and depression in real time. People were responding. The tide felt like it was slowly turning. Then came the announcement that she and Ken Jennings would share hosting duties on Jeopardy. Jennings on the syndicated version, Mayim on primetime specials and spin-offs. The reaction from the show's devoted fan base was, To put it mildly, not warm. A vocal section of the audience had decided, before she filmed a single episode, that she was wrong for the role. Online petitions circulated. Comment sections filled up with complaints. Every episode she hosted was analyzed in exhaustive detail. Her pacing, her delivery, her expressions during commercial breaks, what she was wearing. Comparisons to Jennings were relentless and rarely favorable. Some of the criticism was legitimate. Live game show hosting is a highly specific skill that takes years to develop, and Mayim was learning it in public, which is an unforgiving environment for any learning curve. But a significant portion of the hostility felt less like professional critique and more like an accumulated score settling. The parenting book, the Me Too op-ed, the general perception of her as someone who couldn't resist having the last word. She hosted through 2022 and into 2023 until the Writers Guild of America went on strike in May of that year. Mayim made the decision to stop hosting in solidarity with the striking writers. It was a principled stand, consistent with values she had expressed publicly for years. It was also, practically speaking, the moment her opponents at the production level needed. By the end of 2023, Sony confirmed that her contract would not be renewed. Ken Jennings would become the sole permanent host. She had lost a job, in public, in a way that felt, to many people watching, like a final verdict on her entire second chapter in television. What happened after Jeopardy is, in many ways, the most revealing part of the story. She didn't scramble to find a replacement. She didn't announce a comeback project or give a defiant press tour interview about being underestimated. She went back to the things she had already been building quietly, and she leaned into them with more focus than before. Bialik's breakdown, her podcast, deepened. It became a genuine, long-form conversation space. Researchers, psychologists, people navigating serious mental health challenges, all filtered through Mayim's neuroscience background and her own increasingly candid personal history.